In the age when gods walked among warriors, when the raven was fate and the sword was prayer, one name was spoken in longhouses from Dublin to Kiev, not in celebration, in fear. Ivar, son of Ragnar Lothbrok, architect of the Great Heathen Army, conqueror of York, king without legs, commander without mercy. History called him boneless. History had no idea what that meant. Was Ivar born broken? Or was the world simply too small for what he was? What does it mean to be called the Boneless? And did that name destroy him or make him immortal? The 9th century was a world of iron and ice. Scandinavia, a land of bitter winters, thin soil, and men who looked at the horizon and saw not a boundary, but an invitation. The Norse people were farmers, traders, craftsmen, and when the seasons demanded it, raiders. The Vikings weren't the bloodthirsty savages of popular imagination alone. They were complex, sophisticated navigators, traders who built networks from Baghdad to Newfoundland. But yes, they were also formidable warriors. Both things were true. Into this world walked Ragnar Lothbrok. Or rather, Ragnar Lothbrok walked into history and legend so completely intertwined that separating the man from the myth may be impossible. What we know: he was a Norse chieftain, possibly Danish, possibly Swedish. What sagas claim, he was descended from the god Odin himself. Ragnar's historicity is debated, but the Great Heathen Army, which his sons supposedly led in revenge for his death, is absolutely real. We have contemporary records. The army arrived in England in 865 AD. Whatever the mythology around Ragnar, something drove those sons to England with extraordinary force. The saga of Ragnar Ragnarsson tells us something extraordinary. When Ragnar took his second wife, Aslaug, a shield maiden of prophetic gift, she warned him. She had seen it in the runes. She had dreamed it 3 nights running. She told Ragnar, "Wait 3 nights before we share a marriage bed. If you do not wait, our child will be born with no bones in his body." What if the greatest Viking strategist who ever lived was the direct result of his father's impatience and his mother's curse? Did Ivar's condition, whatever it truly was, give him something his brothers could never possess? When Ivar was born, something was different. The sagas are clear and deliberately mysterious. He had bones like cartilage. He could not walk as other men walked. His legs, useless in the conventional sense. His arms, extraordinarily powerful. Historians and medical professionals have proposed several diagnoses across the decades. Brittle bone disease, osteogenesis imperfecta, severe arthrogryposis, a condition causing joint contractures. Some have even suggested it was a poetic description of a man who seemed to have no structural fear whatsoever. The truth? We may never know. But we know he existed, and we know he led our culture. Intelligence, cunning, vat, was honored as deeply as physical strength. The saga tradition celebrates men who use their minds to destroy enemies their bodies could not reach. Ivar fits this tradition perfectly. He is perhaps its greatest exemplar. He was not born alone into greatness. Ragnar's sons were a collection of warlords that history rarely assembled in one bloodline. Bjorn Ironside, who would campaign to the Mediterranean, Ubbe, who may have reached North America before Columbus, Fitzurk, Sigurd's snake in the eye, and Ivar, who would make them all seem supporting cast. Among a family of legendary warriors, how does a man who cannot walk become the most feared of all? The bond between Ivar and his brothers will be tested, and the fracture, when it comes, will reshape Europe. Around 865 AD, Ragnar Lothbrok sailed to England. The reasons debated. Some say pride, some say prophecy. All accounts agree on what happened next. King Alla of Northumbria captured Ragnar, and instead of a warrior's death, the mercy of a blade, Alla chose spectacle. He chose horror. The sagas record Ragnar's last words as he felt the first bites. How the little piggies will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered. Every account of this moment agrees on one thing. Ivar did not rage. Ivar did not weep. Ivar went completely, dangerously calm. That quality, the cold calculation in a moment of personal catastrophe, is what the sagas use to define Ivar's character. Where his brothers are presented as fire, Ivar is presented as ice. And in real warfare, ice wins. The sons of Ragnar made an oath, not merely to avenge their father, but to make England pay in a currency it had never been asked to pay before. They would take the island, not raid it, take it. 5 brothers, 1 dead father, an island called England. What happens when grief becomes strategy? Ivar's cold silence after hearing of Ragnar's death, was it shock, grief, or the moment a plan was already forming? In the autumn of 865 AD, a force so vast the Anglo-Saxon chronicle called it simply a Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia. The chronicle's author had no good words left. He had run out of adequate description. The Great Heathen Army is one of the most significant events in English history. We tend to understate it. This was not a raid. This was a conquest. Within a decade, the Vikings would control more than half of England. They called it the Danelaw. It changed the English language, English law, English place names. We're still living with those changes. What immediately distinguished this army from every Viking force before it? It didn't burn randomly. It moved like a chess player, securing bases, taking horses from conquered territories, traveling further and faster than any invading force England had ever faced. This was Ivar's signature. This was what carried into battle on a shield actually looked like. A mind that saw the whole board. Ivar's tactical sophistication is extraordinary. He understood logistics, he understood politics, he negotiated, he made treaties, he was patient when patience was the weapon. He combined everything a great commander needs, and he did it from a position most of his enemies would have dismissed as weakness. York. The Romans had built it, the Anglo-Saxons had claimed it. It was the richest city in northern England. Ivar wanted it. On November 1st, 866 AD, All Saints' Day, while Northumbrian Christians were in church, the Great Heathen Army walked through York's gates. The Northumbrians had been fighting a civil war. Ivar had known this. Ivar had waited for this. York fell not to Viking violence. but to Viking patience. What other tools was Ivar wielding that his enemies never saw coming? Every victory Ivar achieves relies on one thing no one expects from a man on a shield. What is it? They had come for this. More than York, more than the Danelaw. They had crossed the North Sea for this one man. Alla of Northumbria, the king who had put Ragnar in the pit, the king who had chosen the serpents, the king who was now looking at the 5 sons of the man he had killed. The sagas describe what happened to Alla as the Blood Eagle, a ritual execution, the back opened, the ribs broken outward, the lungs pulled through. The image of wings in death, the final offering to Odin. The Blood Eagle is one of the most contested topics in Viking scholarship. Did it actually happen? Some historians argue it was a later embellishment, a symbolic description of defeat made literal. Others argue the ritual was genuine. What we cannot argue is the psychological power of the story. Whether real or legend, it communicated something absolute. Ivar does not merely defeat you, he unmakes you. One saga fragment suggests Ivar approached Alla alone before the execution. He asked only one question. Did he beg? Referring to Ragnar. Alla reportedly said nothing. Ivar nodded once. And that was the end of mercy. Ivar waited years for this moment. Was the Blood Eagle a loss of control, or the most controlled act of his life? After Alla's death, something changes in Ivar. Watch what he does next, and ask whether revenge satisfied him, or destroyed him. England was not enough, or rather, England was secured, administered, under his brother's capable, if less precise, hands. Ivar looked west. Ireland. A land of fractious kingdoms, powerful monasteries, extraordinary wealth, and no unified defense. By the 870s, Ivar had established himself as the dominant Viking power in the Irish Sea world. Ivar's connection to Dublin is fascinating. He is one of the founding figures of Viking Dublin, Dyflin, which would become one of the most important cities in the Viking world. He didn't just raid Ireland, he settled it. He built something. That's a level of political sophistication we often don't associate with the traditional Viking image. Dublin in the 9th century was not yet the Irish capital. Ivar helped make it a city. He established trade networks, slave markets, brutal, yes, but economically central to Viking expansion. He negotiated with Irish kings rather than simply crushing them. He adapted. And in adapting, he became something his enemies struggled to fight. A Viking king who could govern. What Ivar built in Ireland outlasted him by centuries. The Ymir, the dynasty of Ivar, dominated the Irish Sea region from Dublin long after his death. His name became a dynasty name, a brand, a claim to power. Long after his bones, such as they were dust. Ivar the Conqueror becomes Ivar the City Builder. Does this change how we see him? Or does it make him more frightening? The man who cannot walk has now built cities on 2 islands. What is he truly seeking? Strip away the legend. Strip away the Blood Eagle, the carried shield, the name. Look at what Ivar actually did. Tactically, strategically, politically. What emerges is not a monster. What emerges is a chess grandmaster who happened to play with armies. Ivar understood something most commanders of his era didn't, that logistics wins wars, not heroism. He always secured his supply lines, He always secured his retreat before he attacked. He created strategic ambiguity. Enemies never knew where he would strike next. These are principles we still teach in military academies. Viking sagas consistently suggest Ivar had informants. He knew about Northumbrian civil war before he landed. He knew about Mercia's weakness before he moved. He gathered intelligence the way other men gathered weapons. The sagas use the word fitr, clever, cunning, repeatedly for Ivar. This is always paired with warnings. His enemies consistently underestimate him because they're looking at his body and missing his mind. The saga authors are telling us something. The lesson of Ivar is what it costs to confuse physical power with actual power. His brothers loved him, feared him, struggled to understand him. There is no saga account of Ivar celebrating a victory, no record of him drunk at a feast, no wife mentioned prominently, no children recorded. Just campaigns, just strategy, just the next problem to be solved. Was Ivar the Boneless ultimately a man who had traded everything personal for total capability? Did the boy born unable to run simply decide, or was he compelled to become something that had no need of legs? What happens to a brilliant mind that has never been required to slow down? We have tracked Ivar's victories. We haven't yet looked at what the victories were hiding. Stay with us. Among the brothers, Ubbe appears most often beside Ivar in the historical record. They campaigned together in England. They shared command. If Ivar was the mind, Ubbe was often the sword arm that the mind trusted most. The relationship between Ivar and Ubbe is historically significant. They appear to have genuinely coordinated. There's strategic coherence in their joint campaigns that suggests real communication, real mutual trust. That's rare in any medieval context, let alone among competing sons of a legendary chieftain. As Ivar consolidated the North Sea world, Bjorn Ironside sailed south, all the way to the Mediterranean, North Africa, Italy. The sons of Ragnar were now scattered across an entire continent, the greatest Viking family in history, and they barely occupied the same sky. Fitzurk and Sigurd Snake in the Eye leave lighter historical footprints, but the saga tradition preserves something painful. They both spent their lives in part in Ivar's shadow. And shadows, no matter how brilliant the light that casts them, are cold places to stand. The sagas are quite conscious of what it means to be Ivar's brother. There's a sense of both pride and weight in those portrayals. Ivar's genius is presented as both the family's greatest strength and, for those closest to him, perhaps their greatest burden. What does it mean to be the greatest family of warriors in history, and to see those warriors scattered to every horizon? Ivar is winning everywhere, and yet, something in the saga accounts suggests a man alone. We are almost at the answer. History is mostly silence, but sometimes the earth speaks. At Repton in Derbyshire, archaeologists found what may be the winter camp of the Great Heathen Army. A charnel mound, hundreds of Viking warriors, and at the center, a single warrior's grave, set apart, buried with extraordinary honor. Male, approximately 35 to 45 years old, with healed injuries suggesting a lifetime of combat, and bone anomalies in the legs. The Repton warrior. It's one of the most intriguing finds in Viking archaeology. We've now done isotope analysis that places the individual's origins in Scandinavia. The bone structure of the legs is unusual, not what we'd expect. Could it be Ivar? We cannot say definitively, but the circumstantial evidence is among the most compelling in Viking archaeology. Ivar the Boneless appears in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, contemporary, real, written by people who feared him. Ragnarssona Thatr, the tale of Ragnar's sons. Ivar in Beinlausi in multiple Icelandic sagas. In Irish annals as Imar, King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain. That last title was not self-awarded. It was given by his enemies, by the people who had every reason to minimize him. They couldn't. A man who couldn't walk, remembered for 1,000 years as the king who controlled 2 islands. What does his story say about the stories we tell about power? We seeded one question at the very beginning. Was his condition his weakness, or the source of everything? Here is the answer. The Irish annals record Ivar's death in 873 AD. He was not young. For the 9th century, for a man who had spent decades being carried into battles, he had lived extraordinarily long. The Annals of Ulster describe his death with 3 words that, in context, are everything. Imar, King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain, died of a sudden, hideous disease. The phrase sudden hideous disease, in the annals, that's often code for something the writer witnessed or was told about. For a scribe who usually writes minimally, hideous is a word you only use when you mean it. We don't know what killed him, but it was notable enough to record the quality of it. Theories range from epidemic disease to the cumulative physical toll of a life with his condition. Brittle bone disease, if that was his diagnosis, carries systemic complications. Internal organs affected, breathing compromised. A man who had defeated armies, crossed seas, built cities, facing the one enemy he could not outmaneuver: his own body, from the very beginning. If the Repton warrior is Ivar, and we cannot say it is with certainty, then his burial was magnificent. Placed at the center of his army, surrounded by the men he had led, honored as he had chosen to be honored, not by wealth, but by the presence of warriors. The man who could not walk, buried at the center of those who ran toward death for him. He died of a disease, not a blade, not a battlefield. Does that change his story, or complete it? We asked, did his condition give him something his brothers never had? The answer is yes, and here it is. His brothers had legs. They could run toward glory. They could also run away from it. Ivar could not run from anything. Every battle he was carried toward, he had chosen. Every campaign, deliberate. Every risk, calculated. He had no impulse to outrun, only the capacity to outwit. That is why he won. That is why, 11 centuries later, we are still saying his name. York became Jorvik. Derby, Nottingham, Lincoln, Leicester, Stamford. The 5 boroughs of the Danelaw, Viking administrative centers. Still here, still named from the Norse. Your GPS still says names Ivar's army gave to the landscape. Dublin is a Viking city. Du Lin, the Black Pool. Ivar didn't just raid it, he didn't just tax it. He founded the civic tradition that made it a city worth having. Every person who has ever called Dublin home, in some structural sense, stands on what Ivar built. When we excavate Viking Dublin, we find a planned settlement. Streets, property boundaries, craft workshops, trade goods from across the known world. This is not random. Someone with administrative vision shaped early Dublin. Ivar is the most plausible candidate.
Ivar the Boneless.
Ivar the Boneless. His enemies named him for what they saw as his weakness, and in doing so, they preserved him forever. Because the name they chose in mockery became the name that outlasted them all. Allah's name is remembered only because Ivar killed him. The kings of Northumbria are remembered only because Ivar took their city. The Irish kingdoms he negotiated with are remembered partly because he made them worth negotiating with. He was the most unlikely conqueror in European history. Born into a body that the world said would confine him, and he used that body, and the mind it had forced him to develop, to reshape a continent. The bones, they said, were the wrong shape. The bones, as it turned out, were the whole point.